Somewhere in northern Ukraine, a city of 50,000 people is perfectly preserved and perfectly empty. The apartments still have furniture, the schools still have textbooks open on desks, the amusement park opened for exactly one day and never closed again. And right now, 40 years after the worst nuclear disaster in human history, the exclusion zone around Chernobyl remains so radioactive in places that you would absorb a lethal dose simply by standing there for 15 minutes. But here is the thing that should unsettle you most. It almost didn't happen. A series of decisions, each one made by real human beings who were tired, pressured, or simply afraid to say no, turned a routine safety test into an event that contaminated 77,000 square miles of Europe, forced the permanent evacuation of entire cities, and quite possibly helped collapse a superpower. This is not just a disaster story. This is a story about what happens when an entire system, political, scientific, cultural, becomes more afraid of admitting a problem than solving one. It is 1954. The Soviet Union switches on Obninsk, the world's first nuclear power plant to feed electricity to a civilian grid. The reactor produces just 5 megawatts, barely enough to power a small neighborhood, but the propaganda value is incalculable. The atomic age belongs to the USSR. You have to understand the context. The Soviet nuclear program is not merely an engineering project. It is ideology made physical. It proves that Soviet science, Soviet planning, Soviet will can outrun the West. Nuclear power, in Moscow's telling, is socialism's gift to humanity, clean, infinite, glorious. Throughout the late 1950s and 1960s, the USSR constructs a fleet of reactors, but one design emerges as the flagship of Soviet nuclear ambition, the RBMK, a Russian acronym for High-Power Channel-Type Reactor. It is enormous, capable of generating 1,000 megawatts of electricity. It can be refueled while running without ever shutting down. It is, Soviet engineers insist, so safe it needs no containment dome. Western reactors hide behind thick concrete shells. The RBMK stands proud and open, a monument to Soviet confidence. There is one detail the Soviet nuclear establishment does not advertise widely, not even to the plant operators who run these machines. The RBMK has a fatal design flaw. At low power, in certain conditions, the reactor becomes unstable. As steam builds inside the core, the nuclear reaction accelerates rather than dampens. In Western reactor design, this is called a positive void coefficient, and it is considered so dangerous that most Western designs specifically engineer it away. The Soviets did not. Or rather, they knew, they calculated, they wrote it into classified reports, and they built the reactors anyway because stopping would mean admitting that the flagship of Soviet nuclear pride had a flaw. That decision, made in the 1960s, buried in classified files, is the first domino. By 1977, construction begins on Unit 4 of the Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power station near the small Ukrainian city of Pripyat. The plant will be known to history by the name of a nearby village, Chernobyl. It is 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986. You are standing in the control room of Reactor 4 at Chernobyl. The air smells of industrial oil and warm electronics. The room is full of gauges, switches, and graphs, a Soviet-era cathedral of control. 30 operators and engineers are on shift. They are tired. This test was supposed to begin 14 hours ago, but a phone call from Kyiv, the regional grid needed power, delayed everything into the dead of night. The test itself is routine, at least on paper. Engineers want to know whether during a power outage, the coasting turbines can generate enough electricity to power the reactor's own cooling pumps for the 75 seconds it takes for backup diesel generators to kick in. This test has been attempted 3 times before. 3 times it has failed. Tonight, they try again. Here's what you need to know. The night shift now running this test was not briefed on its full details. The man in charge of the test, Anatoly Dyatlov, deputy chief engineer, is known for being aggressive, dismissive of objections, and possessed of absolute confidence in his own judgment. When operators express concern about the reactor's unstable, low power state, the Rattled tells them to proceed. At 1:23:04 a.m., senior engineer Leonid Toptunov initiates the emergency shutdown, the final step of the test. Control rods begin sliding into the reactor core to absorb neutrons and stop the chain reaction. But something is wrong. The control rods in the RBMK have graphite tips. When they first enter the core, rather than slowing the reaction, the graphite amplifies it. For 3 catastrophic seconds, reactor power does not fall, it surges. From 200 megawatts, it climbs to an estimated 30,000 megawatts, 30 times its maximum design output in less than 3 seconds. The water inside the fuel channels flashes instantly to steam. Then the steam explodes. The first explosion blows the 1,000-ton reactor lid, a steel disc as heavy as a fully loaded Boeing 757, straight into the roof. The second explosion, 2 to 3 seconds later, scatters burning reactor fuel and graphite across the facility grounds. The graphite burns at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. At 1:23:47 a.m., Reactor 4 no longer exists as a functioning machine, and the operators in the control room, breathing air now heavy with invisible, lethal isotopes, do not yet understand what has happened. 36 hours after the explosion, the 50,000 residents of Pripyat are finally told to evacuate. For 36 hours, they have been living, breathing, and in some cases playing outside in air contaminated with radioactive particles. Children play in the fallout. Residents comment on a strange metallic taste on their tongues, on eyes that burn, on a curious glow over the horizon. Soviet officials know the truth within hours of the explosion. The plant's own dosimeters, the instruments that measure radiation levels, begin going off the scale immediately. One KGB report sent to Moscow by 5 a.m. on April 26 confirms a complete destruction of the reactor. But the first official Soviet statement, released that same morning, describes the incident as an accident that has been localized. This is not a miscommunication, this is policy. The Soviet system operates on a principle that information flows upward through hierarchy only when it is safe to do so, when it reflects well on those reporting it. Bad news is softened. Catastrophes become incidents. The men on the ground who know the truth face a choice: report accurately and invite punishment for bearing bad news, or report what the hierarchy wants to hear. Pripyat City Council holds a meeting on the morning of April 26. Officials sit around the table 50 meters from a burning nuclear reactor and debate whether an evacuation is really necessary, because an evacuation would cause panic, and panic would reflect badly on Soviet management of the situation. Meanwhile, the graphite fire in the open reactor core is pumping a plume of radioactive isotopes, cesium-137, iodine-131, strontium-90, plutonium, into the atmosphere. The plume drifts northwest. By April 28th, a Swedish nuclear power plant 1,100 miles away detects radioactive contamination on the shoes of its own workers arriving for their morning shift. Sweden demands an explanation from Moscow. Only then, forced by foreign detection, does the Soviet Union acknowledge to the world that something has happened at Chernobyl. Between 1986 and 1990, the Soviet Union mobilizes an estimated 600,000 people to contain, clean, and entomb Reactor 4. They are called liquidators, the liquidators. Soldiers, miners, firefighters, helicopter pilots, construction workers, physicists, teachers conscripted for their vehicles. Some are volunteers motivated by genuine heroism. Many are simply ordered. They operate in a landscape transformed by radiation into something from another world. The forest immediately surrounding the plant, 6 square kilometers of pine trees, has been killed so completely by the initial radiation burst that it turns a deep rust-colored red. It is called the Red Forest. Walking through it without protection means absorbing a potentially lethal dose within minutes. The helicopter pilots are perhaps the most exposed. In the first days after the explosion, while the reactor core burns openly, pilots fly repeated sorties over the open reactor mouth, dropping sand, boron, lead, and clay to smother the fire. Their helicopters have no radiation shielding. Some pilots complete 40 or 50 flights before being still down. Many die of radiation-induced illnesses in the years that follow. The miners are almost forgotten by history. Over 400 coal miners are brought from the Donetsk region to dig a tunnel beneath the burning reactor, manually, by hand in rotational shifts, because engineers fear the molten reactor core will burn through the concrete floor and contaminate the groundwater of the Dnieper River system, which supplies drinking water to 30 million people. They dig for 40 days straight. The temperature in the tunnel reaches 50 degrees Celsius. They work shirtless. They are not given adequate dosimeters. Many are told the radiation levels are safe. Many develop cancers in subsequent years. Almost none receive the recognition given to the firefighters.
Here is the counterintuitive truth that even historians understate. The liquidators worked. The Chernobyl disaster could have been immeasurably worse. The risk of a second steam explosion, which Soviet physicists calculated could have rendered a 320-kilometer radius of Ukraine uninhabitable for centuries, was real and was averted. The groundwater contamination that could have poisoned tens of millions was prevented. The sarcophagus entombing the reactor was completed in just 206 days. The Soviet system that created the disaster also summoned from its own people a response of genuinely extraordinary collective sacrifice. That paradox sits at the heart of everything. On December 25, 1991, 5 years and 8 months after Reactor 4 exploded, the Soviet Union ceases to exist. Many historians now argue that Chernobyl was one of the catalysts, not just the economic costs, estimated at 18 billion Soviet rubles in direct expenditure, but the political cost of exposure. Mikhail Gorbachev himself wrote in his memoirs that Chernobyl was perhaps the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union. The disaster cracked the edifice of official infallibility. If the state could not manage a nuclear reactor safely, if it would lie to its own people for 36 hours while they breathed contaminated air, what else had it lied about? The health consequences remain fiercely debated. The official UN Chernobyl Forum report, published in 2005, attributed around 4,000 eventual deaths to radiation exposure. Independent researchers and medical organizations working in Belarus, which received 70% of the fallout despite being a separate country, document dramatically higher rates of thyroid cancer, leukemia, and congenital abnormalities in the contaminated regions, and argue the true toll will never be fully known. The Ukrainian government estimates the disaster affected more than 3.5 million people's health.
The exclusion zone, a 2,600 square kilometer ring around the plant, officially remains closed to permanent habitation, but nature has quietly moved back in. Without human pressure, the zone has become one of the most biodiverse wildlife refuges in Europe. Wolves, lynx, brown dares, wild horses, species largely absent from Western Europe, roam Pripyat abandoned boulevards. Biologists debate whether the animals suffer genetic damage or whether the absence of humans more than compensates for radiation exposure. The reactor itself now sits beneath the new safe confinement, a 36,000-ton steel arch, the largest movable land structure ever built, slid over the original sarcophagus in 2016. It is designed to last 100 years. The material beneath it, the melted fuel mass called the elephant's foot, so radioactive that a 30-second exposure in 1986 guaranteed death, will remain dangerous for approximately 20,000 years. The exclusion zone will outlast every institution, every ideology, and every language that created it. What makes Chernobyl different from other disasters is not the scale of destruction. History is full of catastrophes larger in body count. What makes it different is the architecture of its failure. The way each layer of the system, from the reactor's design to the engineer's silence to the politician's press release, was constructed to prevent the truth from being seen until it was too late to matter. 40 years on, Reactor 4 still burns, in the only way that something entombed in concrete and steel can, slowly, invisibly, for millennia. It is the most honest metaphor our modern world has produced, a fire that cannot be put out, only covered over, and passed on to generations who had no say in lighting it. If this story stayed with you, and I think it should, drop a comment below telling me which part of Chernobyl's history you knew least about. And if you want more stories like this one, where the history is real, details are unsparing, and nothing is simplified for comfort, subscribe, because there is so much more to come.